I decided that I wanted to change something this year about how my brain worked. And I've studied neuroscience for a long time. It's been a passion of mine, along with doing somatic work, yoga, meditation, understanding some of the ancient mythology and their ways of understanding healing and change, death and rebirth of the ego, of ourselves. And I wanted to see if I could create a system for myself that I could rewire my mind. I had a interesting and pretty intimate conversation with my doctor of 10 years, and we were discussing my HRV, which is your heart rate variability. And it's basically what your vagus nerve controls, and it runs throughout our body, so through our nerves. And my HRV had been chronically low for quite some time. Now, I was in a situation that was making me feel chronically stressed and upset. And I also recognized that I was contributing to that in ways that I couldn't identify yet. So I decided to build off of what I was learning and understand certain things about myself, like anxious attachment or codependency. I had to understand my overfunctioning and overgiving in order to receive love or be validated. And I knew just knowing these facts wouldn't change anything. So I had to go deeper. And what neuroscience has taught us is that you can, in fact, rewire your mind. It's the neuroplasticity of our mind is really powerful. And things that we previously thought might be personality traits are actually just well-worn pathways in our mind. But the most important part was understanding that these well-worn pathways that were making me continually anxious could be changed. So I knew 12 weeks was the minimum for what it takes for the brain to build new neural pathways. And I wanted to spend each week focusing on something different. And I started with the first week, which is uncover. I wanted to uncover all of the things that I had kind of kept from myself, maybe gaslighted myself. My therapist calls them covert agreements with myself, of where the things we don't want to look at in our lives and how that can affect us because we're trying to avoid noticing something we might be doing that's causing harm to ourselves. So I uncovered all of these parts that I noticed were from past, from patterning, from childhood. And I just spent that week with them, uncovering, looking. It was kind of like moving the soil away from some roots. And I wanted to do this because in the ancient story of Inanna, she chooses to leave. She was the goddess of heaven. She chooses to leave heaven and go to the underworld. And all of her special royal garments were taken. It's like our ego. And it's all stripped away. And these pieces, bit by bit, had to be stripped away from me as my protection. My ego was protecting me by me believing if I was a superhero to everyone, if I showed up and fixed everyone's problems, that I was valuable. I didn't know how to just value myself because I'm just a valuable person. And maybe you also notice that you tend to overgive or overfunction to hold relationships together or to make people feel like you're the best person. You get complimented all the time. So as I uncovered these things, I noticed this probably isn't something I want to continue. And how do I stop myself from wanting to dive in and, get my hands in there and try to fix everything? What we tend to do is think, I'm going to fix me. And this is more of a adjusting, right? Changing the pathway and changing direction instead of I'm broken, I need to be fixed mentality. And I spent just holding this, trying to be with the fact that I knew these things about myself. And it was sort of a lifting off of a burden. And the following week, I decided to give these things a funeral. So one of the things in one of my favorite books, Women Who Run with the Wolves, it's Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She talks about the cycles of the birth, death, and rebirth cycles that we go through. So we come into a new understanding of life and we go through deaths or ego deaths at times, or deaths of parts of ourselves that no longer serve us, and then a rebirth. And those all have transitional moments that are really tough, but I wanted to give these old parts of me a very definitive burning ceremony of where I was going to let them go and stop these patterns, basically. So I did that, and I actually have like a little cauldron just because I like to put candles and incense in there, but I burn paper sometimes. And I burned each thing, like overgiving, overfunctioning, anxious attachment, codependency. But you can actually rewire how your mind understands functioning in relationships and within the world. The next week was dismantling. So going through, pulling out all of these pieces that I knew were the, whether it's the broken rubble or finding the spots where I knew I needed to dismantle the old pathways and truly make sure they were not going to continue on. And I needed to make it a definitive dismantling. They can be rebuilt in a new way. And that's what building new neural pathways does, is when you build new ones and the old ones aren't used, those thoughts don't continue on, they actually like die back. And then they're no longer firing and continuing to do that. So that's how a lot of people make it through recovery, addiction recovery. They change direction in their life. That's how that happens, is they stop the same pattern. And so sometimes it's a pattern disruption. So your brain doesn't look for what it's familiar with. And we can tend to panic when we don't have what's familiar around us. And that leaves us thinking something's very wrong, even if we're doing the right thing. So in that dismantling time, I really wanted to think about what the inner voices were that were keeping me stuck. What were things I was told as a kid, as a young adult, things that I told myself that were keeping me in a loop of who I believed myself to be, how I was supposed to be acting, what I was supposed to be doing, and pulling out all of that and laying it out to go, okay, and all of this has to go because it's not serving me, it's creating pain for me, it cannot continue. So that week was hard because I was diving into these places that it brings up resentment, and it brought up also a sort of relief of, now I get to move on from this phase. The next week, which would be the fourth week for me, it was a reclamation. I wanted to reclaim and take my power of who I am and who I believe myself to be since I was a child and take it back and be able to write down and reclaim all of those things. So I spent a lot of time writing and defining who I am and who I desire to grow into and be reborn into, because I didn't want to live in that same cycle anymore. It was creating blocks for me to continue to grow and feel the fulfillment that I desired in my life. And a lot of that was from self-abandonment. So I had to put strong boundaries on myself from looking at the uncovering and the dismantling of, we cannot return to those behaviors or patterns or personality traits that seem to serve us as a function, but actually were creating quite a lot of harm or suffering. So after that reclaiming, I wanted to give us a week of where I was intentionally deciding to rewire. So giving myself things to repeat, to remind myself, because I wanted to make new connections for my brain to hold on to. Whether that was, I am a wise woman, I am capable, I am loved even if a relationship isn't working out, I am valuable without all of the old bad sprinkles of the overgiving and overfunctioning. And that was a week that felt really important to me, to set that tone, to make that part of the journey. I wanted to integrate in the old ancient ways and somatic parts of reminding myself through meditation of these amazing things. And meditation is a great tool to sit with and remind yourself of these beautiful parts of you and releasing and dissolving away, which can also be part of the rewiring these old beliefs about yourself or about how you should be in the world or of others. From there, I wanted to really think about, what does it mean for me to feel regulated in my body? Because when I referred back to the conversation with my doctor, I noticed that she was right. So much of my life I had spent in deep anxiety, fear. It would run my mind, my operating system, and my HRV was not going to change or improve until I stopped letting my amygdala be the controller. And as I continued into the research, learning that your amygdala actually shuts down your prefrontal cortex when it's firing in constant fight or flight. So it disrupts creative flow and creative thinking. So if you're in any relationships or situations where you don't feel safe and you don't feel consistently okay and cared for, your amygdala is going to consistently be in fight or flight. So that made me make some tough decisions about what kind of relationships I wanted to be in from there, and decide whether or not I was going to leave or stay, and if I could stay regulated and continue this journey of rewiring in those relationships. So many of us, that when we're trying to change our lives, we feel the fear of everything falling apart. And that's, I hate to simplify it because it's not simple, but the good news of that is that it is simply our brain wanting, it's predicting based off of old patterns, because it is a prediction engine. Even if they weren't good ones, it will feel incredibly uncomfortable to suddenly not have those old patterns anymore. So once I had started to figure out, how am I going to consistently regulate my nervous system, whether that meant take time for a meditation or rest, take my time in the mornings differently, not get wrapped up in other people's chaos and drama. That was a big one for me, because my tendency was to dive in and try to fix the chaos for someone else. And that was not a healthy pattern at all, or fix other people's mental chaos. And instead, I needed to think about my own inner world and not get involved in other people's for a while. My favorite quote was, "Not mine to fix." So that was extremely regulating. And it's also very clarifying of how to continue forward. But you recognize, like, you can't just walk through a dangerous situation anymore. And so many of us do that willingly because we believe that that is love. The next one is, I wanted to then be very clear. Now that I had clarity, I wanted to map. And I'm kind of a fun map geek. I like looking at old topography and understanding how they would make the maps of the past. And you didn't have satellites, so they had to go based on soundings and from the boats, and just looking at the geography as they sailed or walked around these places, and a lot of times they got it wrong. That helped me define more clearly the values and boundaries of what were important to me for my life, and map out the truth so decisions could make themselves. So once I mapped out the boundaries, and not boundaries against other people, but boundaries for me. So I could say, being spoken to that way by someone is not something I'm willing to participate in. And then I could say, I hear what you're saying, I'm gonna exit this conversation. Or the boundary of how I would like to be treated by other people, regardless of who they were in my life. And, family, friends, relationships. The values is so important, because if you don't know what you value, then it's hard to navigate and to map out your future. And so for me, I had to define my values as loving adventure, loving creativity. I really love caring, thoughtful relationships and friendships that are consistent. Then this allowed me to decide to move into and step into alignment with action. So all these other weeks, I was just letting my brain begin to build the new pathways, to notice when it was hitting old patterns, and to be able to then regulate and come back to the wiring, come back to understanding how I wanted to feel in my body, which was I wanted to feel calm, and I wasn't going to feel calm if I kept being in chaos or allowing chaos or creating chaos for myself. And I also needed to understand all those things. So moving, and then the values in the map so you can follow the new pathways. So this is a very thorough process as I move through the weeks. And I love being the guinea pig because I could prove to myself that this can be done. The next part was revealing other parts. So instead of ego deaths, like the masks that we wear, mine was perfection. I didn't want to get it wrong. And I especially didn't want people to know how I was feeling, even though it's probably much easier to guess than I believe. And I wanted to reveal that and speak truth into who I was and let those masks go and let who I am, just who I am, be enough. That was important to me, to not fill the spaces with fluff and, put on a parade of life. I wanted to show up authentically. And that was very good for my nervous system, because trying to get it perfect and get it right, or trying to control the outcome of something, was part of the dysregulating and the anxiety inducing. And those were there because of fears and traumas as a child and as a young person, but they didn't need to define my everyday life or my future or how I felt in my body. And feeling safe in my body was the most important thing. And then aligning, this is week 10, aligning with my purpose, embodying it, being very clear with that. And then by that week, I was like, whoa, I want to share this with other people. And self-trust kept coming up. So if you've looked at any of my other videos, you'll hear me talk about self-trust over and over and over, because that was a big part of this whole recipe, was trusting myself that I could do this. You have had to trust some part of yourself to be able to achieve doing that you are capable, and that you are able to learn, and you have enough wisdom and all the good things. So that was a big thing. So I started documenting all of this and putting it down. And by week 10, I was like, I need to share this with people. Other people need to feel this way, because suddenly in my body, I wasn't feeling the same fight or flight experience anymore. I wasn't feeling the anxious anymore. And I noticed a lot of the things I had been doing previously had started to already fall away. I was feeling quite empowered and more focused and driven on the things that I loved, which was so valuable to me. And I knew there's so many other people out there who are entrepreneurs and business owners who are feeling the same, and possibly you're at the point of burnout where you're like, oh, I might just literally burn down my life. There's just mental chaos all the time. I cannot keep up. And we're living in this perfectionism, performance-driven mentality. So that was an important week for me, because I aligned with my purpose, and then I started fulfilling it too. But I needed to finish this 12 weeks before I continued and started sharing it. So I just started building. The week 11 for me was rebuilding. It's laying the new foundation for the life I want, and then holding that clarity, that ground, the rooting, reference things like growing deep roots and being unshakable, like that old ancient tree, whether it's an oak or a maple, that stands firm even in the storms, and people can take shelter under and seek wisdom. And that was an important one for me, to grow the deep roots and find that place in me where I could walk through things that I knew were going to be hard. So that's when real decisions started happening, where I started shifting things in my life. And it did get more uncomfortable, but I could fall back on the other tools and the other uh, rituals I had built in order to walk through it differently and not just collapse in anxiety. And then week 12, I was feeling really good, very confident, very relaxed. And that was abnormal. Like I could take time and rest, but often when I did that, I would feel like I needed to be doing something to be productive. And I know so many people out there that feel the same way because we're stuck in performance mode. But once you're in that, and I've started to rebuild what I wanted my life to look like, how to grow the deep roots and feel unshakable, I came to the idea that this was the week that I became self-led. So it was a leadership week. I started leading myself into what I knew was the right path for my life, and made difficult decisions. But that week was pivotal in understanding what self-leadership really looks like, and not like phoning a friend all the time and saying, what do you think? Or asking other people what they thought, or just pretending like I had the solution and coming up with it. It was truly like sitting with myself, figuring out how I could be rooted and clear and trust myself, and then be able to do that again and again in relationships and rooms I entered, feeling not a false sense of confidence, but just feeling grounded in who I was. Because a lot of us, depending on what you do, will show up and will put on a performance to seem confident or to seem fun and cordial and friendly. But we really want to be grounded and authentic to who we are, because that relieves that anxiety of performing someone. And we don't have to do that anymore. So I put all of these weeks together, I documented it all, and then I decided to share it. And I had a client go through it, and we did the same 12 weeks, and it was incredible. By week 3, they were already saying, my life looks so different already. The future looks so different. I'm so excited. And by week 12, it was beautiful to see this person unfold into this new identity and passion for life. And so I decided to turn it into a whole program and make it something that I could serve and live out my purpose. It's something that it's come entirely from my heart, and just a deep desire to see other people feel the same sense of calm and deep self-affection, instead of feeling like we have to live out our lives in these consistent patterns that we know aren't working.